All right, so my name is Dave Lester. I'm one of the developers of Omeka. We're from the Center for History and New Media. You may know us from this other piece of software that we've created called Zotero. This is Chris Kelly. He's another developer on the project. Our project manager, Jeremy Boggs, is actually sitting over there. He lost his voice, but he's on the IRC channel. So if you want to talk to him, if you want to talk trash, Jeremy, his handle is CleoWeb.
Also, yeah, should we mention we set up a sandbox for Omeka, like an installation that people can play around with while we're talking if you want. So I think Jeremy's posting the link to that on the channel.
Right. So Jeremy should be linking actually to the sandbox, and the slides are up online too if you want to follow along with us. So getting started, we're presenting Omeka. Omeka is essentially a collection publishing system that we've developed at the Center for History and New Media. So allowing people to present any digital collections and associated metadata with these digital items in an easily publishable open source platform. We make parallels often to WordPress. So Omeka is essentially WordPress for your collections, making this really open for anyone to present their things in a narrative form. So apparently the resolution messed things up a little bit, but we'll keep going. So basically, the history of Omeka, brief history, is that the center, we've been involved in building educational websites for the past 10, 12 years now. And the website that's closest to the current version of Omeka was really the September 11th archive that we built to collect oral histories from the tragedy of 9/11. So we built the September 11th archive as a way to collect these oral histories and then present them on the web for free. And this is really the beginning of several different websites that I'll quickly show you and go through that are examples of Omeka and what Omeka can do using what now we have as a contribution plugin. So I mentioned that Omeka is kind of like WordPress for your collections and exhibits. 3 examples of different uses for Omeka include collecting. So we have a collection plugin where anyone can then essentially add their own items to the archive that you're creating. So if I want to add images or stories or any kind of digital media that's associated with a topic of an archive, I can use the collecting plugin to do that. We also have an exhibit builder. Essentially, the exhibit builder allows you to create narrative around the objects that are in your collection. So you no longer have to just have a list of items that are in your collection. You're actually presenting your items themselves. So we can handle different types of media, such as video, audio, images, and we're improving that constantly. The way that we actually present these on the web, but exhibits themselves allow you to actually add narrative text around these, so you're contextualizing the items in your collection. So you're no longer just having to say, this is the stuff that I have. You're saying, this is why it's important, this is how it connects together. And it's a different approach toward exhibiting the objects that you own. I might say items instead of objects, but that's more of a semantic thing than anything else, because some of the programmers in the room may know that it starts to get very confusing when you're dealing. It starts to get pretty confusing when you're dealing with objects using.
Yeah, well, we had the whole problem with the object when you start dealing with that, but of course.
So we'll refer to them as items, and then as I mentioned at CHN, we build lots of educational websites. So one of those examples is the Making of the History of 1989. So this doesn't look very good, but you can actually watch the slides on. Jeremy should be plugging that on the IRC channel, so if you want to look at that. The Hurricane Digital Memory Bank is another one of our collecting websites that we created after the hurricanes Rita and Katrina to gather essentially stories about the victims. Something I should have maybe given a little more backstory on. One of the reasons that we had to make Omeka and that it was really important was because we found out that we were really making one-off websites that were very, very similar for several different projects. So we wanted some kind of generalized system that allowed flexibility and was also going to be open to the public for people to build similar websites in the future. So one of the best uses of this so far was actually the April 16th archive after the Virginia Tech shootings. Within a few days, we were able to launch this website in cooperation with Virginia Tech to then start collecting stories and images to start remembering the tragedy, which I think in many ways, I think it's an important asset to those communities and the ability for anyone to really create a website like this. Object of History is one of our teaching websites, which I wish you could see this a little better, but this uses the exhibit builder essentially to take objects in your collection and then to create that narrative text, that contextualization of your items themselves. And The Making of History 1989 is one of our teaching websites. So you see how all these websites look very different. This is made possible by the theming architecture that we have in Omeka. We also have a plugin architecture, which Chris will actually go into in a few minutes. So the basic components of Omeka. You have the item archive, which allows you essentially to add, delete, edit items, and all metadata associated with them. We use the Dublin Core standard as a way of pushing a metadata standard to anyone who uses this. So you can be a museum professional using this. You can be a librarian using this, or you can just be a collector. I could have my own beer bottle collection or Pez collection or anything, but we are pushing the standard as a way of getting further metadata out of just normal individuals. But the extensible architecture of Omeka really allows you to add any kind of metadata that you'd like to use. The exhibit builder, which I mentioned, and I'll show you a couple screenshots of this. Add the narrative text to items. User management, obviously, so you can have different users who can access in different things in the admin panel, who can control your Omeka installation, and then site settings, general things like themes, plugins, etc. Going through this.
Wow. Yeah, that's mildly broken. The slides look a little broken, but the Omeka's not, so.
Right, yeah.
The actual sandbox installation should be working fine.
Right, the sandbox installation, which Jeremy should have plugged, you guys can actually be adding items, and then afterwards maybe you could tell us what you like or you don't like afterwards. That'd be cool too. So essentially, like I mentioned, you can add items. What's cut off is like the metadata associated with those items. But they're in list format. If you think of the way that you add blog posts in WordPress, it's in a very similar fashion, and the user interface is actually kind of looks a little nicer, thanks to Jeremy's great work with trying to really create a very intuitive interface with that. And then obviously adding in, you can add and edit new metadata types. So or item types. So
right. Well, I guess we should explain here. In terms of the metadata that you can add to specific items, it's really variable based on whatever your project needs are. We originally the core elements are a variation on Dublin Core, but you can extend off of that. So for documents, you might have the actual text of the document, which you wouldn't have if you were using just still images for your archive. But as you can have any number of these, or you can make your own, customize it however you want. But yeah, I mean, these are the built-in ones that you can see right now. The document type is just the built-in one we have for whatever documents you could put in there. But I mean, you can also attach files and include text and whatever you can feel like. Yeah. So, did you want to go?
Briefly, as I mentioned, we have the exhibit builder, which right now is in a different form than you'll probably see it in a few months. We recently released, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, last week we released the first public beta version of Omeka, 0.9.0. In that week, we've had 300 downloads. This is following a beta testing period where it was like a private testing period where we had about 150 people signed up to be trying out Omeka. Some were poking holes in it more than others, trying to stretch it more to its limits, but I would encourage everyone here, if they'd like to, or they're interested in setting up Omeka and really starting to look at its flaws, look at its strengths, and really giving us feedback and helping us build this together. But essentially, like I mentioned, it allows you to then use your items and move them around, create websites based upon those. Here's just some simple metadata that's associated with those exhibits. Obviously, everything we have tagging, we have everything that you'd expect from like a normal Web 2.0 application.
Okay, I guess this is the part where the themes and the plugins were really, we were talking about all these prior websites that we had built that were sort of, we say, these were based on Omeka, but these were really predecessors to the Omeka application that we've been building recently. And the most recent iteration has involved, getting that system together for incorporating themes and plugins much in the same way that WordPress does it, so that we can actually build up a community around that. And the theming will obviously just be to skin your data however you feel like it based on, a large downloadable set of themes that other people have provided or that you have hacked yourself. And the plugins also work along the lines of WordPress too, but you can see, I guess it's a similar principle to the API for themes where of WordPress, where you kind of have HTML with embedded PHP elements in it, but we try to make it as simple as possible, and relatively intuitive. So it sort of reminds, I guess, people who are familiar with templating in Rails or in WordPress would be sort of familiar with this setup. Let's see, and also, yeah, for plugins. Wow, I wish people could read that. Yeah, for plugins, basically, it's just like a callback stack, so that different events that occur at different points in the application, you can define hooks into those, and so you can declare your callback, which this one would be like a database callback, so that if you're updating one of your items, then you can say that this is basically just adding a couple extra pieces of metadata to the item based on form elements that get added by the plugin. So stuff like that. I mean, it's pretty simple. If anybody who's used WordPress before would be kind of familiar with this, not the same exact syntax, but relatively similar. And hooks run at the database level. They also run at the controller level, and they run at the HTML level, like appending stuff directly to your themes, which, because Omeka follows the MVC format. I don't know if I mentioned that before. Probably not, but. And also, this is kind of a cool thing, but we've been talking about themes so far is just along the lines of XHTML, but you can also, right now we have RSS feeds, and we have kind of an XML feed it's kind of useless, but it's a good starting point. But we also have JSON feeds you can do this for your items, your collections, different, just whatever data models you have, and you can actually add to this. So we recently added one that was a Dublin Core RDF feed for your items, so that you can actually retrieve all the data just by switching query parameters in the URL. So that if you had, for example, a site like this where you can see just the front page there, and there's David Bowie, and if you have if you add a query string to it, output equals DC for Dublin Core, it'll just output this instead, which is just an RDF feed of your the Dublin Core information for those items. So, and then also, I guess for plugins, the ones we have built so far, just as an example of what you can do with Omeka plugins, what sort of things you can extend. We have one that's a plugin for coins, which just spits out span tags for all your items, and the good part about that is it makes it Zotero compatible. So that you basically just any Omeka installation you set up is automatically Zotero compatible. A little cross branding there never hurts. And the eventual goal would be round tripping through Zotero, so actually being able to export RDF from Zotero, import back into Omeka, and just endless cycle. And also we have a Dropbox plugin, which is for getting around the limitations of uploading huge files through HTTP, which is kind of a problem when you're setting up an archive and you've got TIFF files that are 100 megabytes and nothing, you can't upload that through a web form. So that was just one of the things we came up with that was very useful at the center. All right. Also have a quick, a pretty simple mapping plugin just to show basically what it's capable of, which is just adding geodata to each one of your items and being able to plot it on a map. And we were talking about this last night, making that much more complicated, in the future. And you can do pretty much anything with that, including using other things like open layers or other technology besides Google Maps. And there was also one that we did that was just like that would be a good example plugin. I wish I had the code for that out actually, but the tag suggest plugin was very good because it would just suggest a list of tags for you to use, because the tagging system we have right now is an uncontrolled vocabulary, so it's just kind of whatever you want to use for tags, and so that was just suggesting a whole bunch for you. And the contribution plugin was based on what Dave was saying before about sites. There's a lot of sites that are going to use Omeka that would be like the April 16th archive, or the 9/11 archive, or the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank, and those would all want to be able to collect and archive submissions from the general public, which is one of the plugins, and basically all the plugins act like mini applications, so that you can add your own pages and your own controllers and your own data models and tables and whatever else you want to do. So it's sort of very similar to other plugin systems, for other applications, but it's the syntax is really what makes it, I think, a little easier to understand than some other systems. So I guess we can move on to the community aspects now, and then Dave wants to talk about that. So.
And then similar to what Andrew was discussing yesterday about open source projects and how we really need to begin to work together. We have our doors open to you, and we would love for you to participate with Omeka and to use it in creative ways. So it's open source, released under GPL. You can download it right now at our website, omeka.org. And there's also the sandbox that I mentioned earlier.
Please break it. We need people to do more beta testing on it.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. I mean, we're at the 0.9 version right now. So there are things in it that may not work the way that they should. And if you think that the way that our database works right now is crap, tell us that. Or if you think it's great, tell us that too. That'd be nice. But essentially, we're still working out the bugs. But I think there's a lot of promise in it, and we've already started to really get some really great ideas from the community, even people here at the conference so far that are interested in making different plugins and themes and whatnot. So I think I mentioned this earlier, but we've had really great success so far in the past week. Over 300 downloads, a lot of interest in it, and I would like to say that Omeka itself isn't made for the library community, but it certainly can be used by the library community. And I think that open source projects in general are much more successful when you can involve the most amount of people and then have them useful for individual communities themselves. So we have people in the museum community, the archival community, the library community, who can all really use Omeka in different ways, but the tool itself, the core of Omeka, is still the tool that we're building. And then the plugins, the extensions, the parts that make Omeka your own experience are really where you guys can shine.
Should we do questions maybe? Or just
yep, we're wrapping up here. I quickly say that give a shout out to Josh over here. The New York Public Library is currently testing and using Omeka. We have lots of different interests in that regard.
Okay.
And yeah, if you want, just go on the forums, give us feedback.
All right. Yeah. I think I'd like to get a couple more questions in before we're done. So we have a couple minutes. So
sure.
Any
Got 2
questions?
minutes.
All right. Anyone?
Oop. Okay. Sorry. Vetoed.
What's under the hood?
What's under the hood? All right. Well, we're using a extended modified version of the Zen framework as the sort of the MVC element, and we were using an ORM for a while, PHP Doctrine, but it was so buggy that I had to get rid of it, and I just kind of rolled my own active record implementation. Kind of runs on MySQL, PHP 5.2, Apache, Linux. Doesn't run so well on Windows currently, but we're sort of just basing it around the open source community, so relying on that sort of thing. But yeah, does that answer? Or okay. All right, awesome. Cool.
Any other questions?
Could you compare and contrast this with other projects that are out there? For instance, Greenstone, maybe WordPress, DSpace, just to give us a sense as to where this fits into the landscape of other projects that are out there.
Sure. Yeah, that is a very good question. I would say that Omeka's strengths are not necessarily the archival qualities of it. While it does offer definitely strong solutions for individuals who are just starting off, some people here may not be happy or satisfied exactly with what it provides out of the box. A, that doesn't mean that it can't do that in the future if you want to extend it to do that. And B, that I don't think it's necessarily our purpose or our niche. I think that creating an open and easy to access tool for individuals and anyone to use, so that's not only institutions, but that could be the person who wants to create their own digital archive to use, is one strength of Omeka. And as far as the comparison to WordPress, I think that we use that comparison sometimes because what we're really trying to do is make that ease of use. Because WordPress, the 5-minute install, I think Omeka, people that we've tested it with have a 7-minute install. And the only reason it takes longer is because since you're uploading files, you have to actually change the permissions of a directory. And not everyone does that when they install WordPress. But other than that, it's rather intuitive. And that is our final goal, to really make this much more accessible so you don't have to spend hours installing something.
As a quick point, like DSpace is more of a CMS in terms of it's got a very, at least my understanding was it's got a very rigorous archival standards for the database, whereas WordPress doesn't have a whole lot much more than the post itself. It's very simple metadata, and this would actually be somewhere between WordPress and DSpace in terms of the archival, the rigorousness of the metadata. But it's much more along the lines of WordPress in terms of what you can do with the display side of things, and how you can much more content publishing in terms of instead of content management kind of.
Right, in the exhibit builder, I think in the long term, if we're looking at like the timeline of Omeka, the future of Omeka, improving the exhibit builder and making that useful to people, I think is what really sets it apart from all other products, and that we are really promoting not just having items themselves on a website, but then using those items to create larger websites.
All right. Thanks a lot, Dave and Chris and Jeremy.